I am tired.
I, Adam Powell, may belong to a group of people that some others may think are inferior, but I belong to a group of people that God, omniscient, omnipresent God, God of all power, says, you are my children, and you're the same as anyone else. And with that kind of faith in me and courage in me, I know I'm as good, if not better, than anybody that walks the halls of Congress.
What a man he was walking the halls of Congress, Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr., serving from 1945 to 1972. Welcome to the Timbuktu Report. That is our topic tonight. Dr. Rick Stevenson with us this week, as always. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Stevenson.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure to work with you, Bishop Pamela Marshall.
You are funny.
Been
You are
elevated.
funny. Thank you, sir. Because of my sweater?
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Rick Stevenson is a professor at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and he is a professor of African American history and African American studies and a man of the cloth. And as we always do, Dr. Stevenson, take us to the Lord in prayer.
We'll do it. Lord, thank you for another year of Thanksgiving that we survived. Thank you for this opportunity to share and to talk about this man, Reverend, Representative, Senator, Congressman, activist, Adam Clayton Powell, a man who was a politician as well as a minister. He was a social activist and a change agent. We are grateful for the life he lived. We pray that you'll raise up more like him. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. A reverend, yeah, he was a reverend and very, very controversial. But the significant thing is, at one point, he was considered not just the most powerful Black man, but the most powerful man in Congress during a time before the civil rights movement, in the way the history books portray it, before it even started. Adam Clayton Powell was staging protests in the North.
Exactly, in New York City. But hold on. So I have a bit of trivia for you. You ready for this?
Okay.
Do you know when Adam Clayton Powell was born?
Was it 02 or 3?
08.
08, okay.
You know the date?
Was it your birthday?
It absolutely was.
Is that right? November 29th?
We were both born on November 29th.
Is that right? Happy birthday.
Yeah.
How does it feel to be a year older?
You know,
About the same?
about the same.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
same triumphs, same failures, same aches.
So and you're Adam Clayton Powell. Let's because I don't want to lose this this guy here. The 29th, your mother knew Adam Clayton Powell. Did she bring that to your attention?
About his birthday?
Uh-huh.
No, I found it out through some research.
Okay.
But my mother was she was a social activist. I mean, she was involved in the NAACP, SNCC, CORE. I mean, if it pushed the envelope, she did it. And the train from Philadelphia is only like an hour and 10 minutes to New York. So she and some of her colleagues would go back and forth to New York quite frequently. And when Powell would come to Philadelphia to speak at the NAACP and stuff like that, she'd be right there. And I because I was the oldest at the time, she'd drag me along with her.
Oh, is that right?
That's how I met Malcolm.
Oh,
I met Malcolm X when I was 9 years old.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I've had this activist thing in me ever since I was a kid. I never really understood it until I got older, but it was always a part of my understanding of who I was and what I was supposed to do. It just, it didn't begin to culminate until I got like in my late 30s, early 40s, but I've always known that there was a connection between those kinds of personalities.
So, Dr. Stevenson, being a historian and me being a product of the school systems in college, when you have seen people like Malcolm and Adam Clayton Powell Jr., yet they're not talked about in the history of Black people in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of it is because the textbooks are controlled by people who don't want you to know about their brilliance. Remember, all the way up until the mid 70s, the majority of your textbooks in elementary school, middle school, and high school were published from scholars who were from the South. And so they dictated what they thought was to be important, that what you needed to know to graduate and to get out of high school. And a lot of that did not take into account the successes and the contributions of people of African descent. So, when someone else controls your history, they dictate where you fit in that narrative.
So somebody is powerful because in the legislative work that I've done, I have heard of the Powell Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And the Powell Amendment had a huge impact on legislation, federal legislation, and where money was actually spent if Black people were not involved. The Powell Amendment is the amendment that was placed on the bill that said, if you're going to pass this, you're going to have to make sure that Black people are going to reap the benefits as well as other people.
Yeah, it's primarily because it was so easy to fire Black people. You may remember back in, I'm trying to find the document. Powell staged a walkout of the hospitals in New York City because they fired 5 Black doctors. And he said, okay, you're going to fire them? We got you. And he staged this walkout, man, and almost shut the churches down. I mean, the hospitals down. So, I think what people miss about Powell was his ability to matriculate in the Black community and the white community. Because he was white passing, oftentimes he was in spaces that Black people didn't get. So he was able to hear a lot of things and learn a lot of things that a lot of people didn't know. And so when he came back to the Black community, he was able to enlighten us and then build, fortresses and strategies against what he learned in those white spaces.
Adam Clayton Powell Jr., an elected official from New York, the first to serve in that spot because they had to draw the lines before the lines were gerrymandered so that no Black could get elected. But the power that he had came from the base of his father's church that he later became the pastor of. And it is said that Representative Powell is the first one to help introduce the power of the Black church in the vote and in the ability to bring about policy reform.
Yeah, Abyssinian Church in New York is one of the oldest churches in the country. It was actually founded in 1809. It's about 212 years old now. And after him came Dr. Samuel Proctor, another, prolific preacher. Following him was Wyatt T. Walker, who also walked with Martin Luther King. So there was a legacy of activism in that particular church in Harlem that spread across the country that was just absolutely incredible. I've been to Abyssinian. So, when you have a pastor like because his dad was amazing. Mm-hmm. But his dad was not as controversial as he was. His dad was very strict Bible, very strict preacher. Not strict in the sense of you can't do this, but strict in that he understood that was his call. Powell had a number of different tangents in the way he was called. He was called to the ministry. Matter of fact, when he went to Colgate, he went there and he got in because he was white passing. Because in those days, you couldn't go to Colgate University. Matter of fact, now it's called Colgate Rochester because they blended 2 universities. I had some friends of mine who actually went to a doctorate program that was offered, a master's program that was offered at Colgate Rochester in the 90s, that was one of the first ones that focused on Afrocentric theological perspectives.
So Powell's father building this church based on this wave of Black people who were migrating from the South to the
Right.
North,
Right.
looking for hope. And as we hear and think about the things that Black people went through in the South,
Right.
what Adam Clayton Powell and his father also recognized, that there were things weren't good in the North either.
Right.
And Adam Clayton Powell, talk about the impact of his activism in telling Black people, don't spend your money where you can't work.
Well, that's, put your money where your mouth is. If you really want my business, then you need to employ people who look like us. And I think that philosophy still works nowadays. It's just that we live in such a, I got to have it right now, environment that we're not willing to hold our funds. But in 1930, he organized picket lines and mass meetings to demand reforms, not only in the community, but in the Harlem Hospital. In 1932, he sponsored a program that provided food, clothing, and temporary jobs for thousands of homeless people who were unemployed in Harlem. So, he was very clear that part of his responsibility was to not only encourage Black people to spend their money where they could socialize and aggregate, but also to become politically sophisticated. He taught them the importance of voting properly and reading down ballot and paying close attention to who's leading your community. So, I think that, and it's interesting, I was just asked to sit on the panel that's coming up next month on the role of the Black church in socialism, in social activism today. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is, I think, for the most part, Black churches have become somewhat irresponsible when it comes to our role in social activism. We've gotten fat, we've gotten lazy, we're not pushing the envelope, and the young people are leaving because we're preaching a doctrine that doesn't fit. But in those days, they were very clear: if we don't do this thing right, we're not going to be successful. And the church was the coagulation of those groups of people.
Adam Clayton Powell, considered the most powerful man in Congress during the time that he was there. Yet there was a lot of controversy surrounding Adam Clayton Powell. He was accused of nepotism. Yet there was a reporter who did an investigation that won a Pulitzer Prize that showed all of the other nepotism that was happening in Congress at the time. Yet Adam Clayton Powell was singled out. Speak to that, Dr. Stevenson, and how those kinds of things that are targeted at African American leaders, how has that impacted those who have come behind Adam Clayton Powell?
Yeah, I think that there's the old saying, what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, but it's not. And at this particular time in history, in 1930s, 1920s, racism in upper levels of government was just absolutely fluid. And nepotism was a way that they maintained that fluidity. And what the establishment did not want to occur was for a person like Adam Clayton Powell to get into power and then begin bringing more Black people in, educating them, encouraging them, teaching them the ropes so that there's competition. And I think that as we look at our government today, I mean, how many African Americans, Asians, Hispanics are in Congress, in the House? Very few. One of the biggest problems that former President Barack Obama had in trying to get various bills and items passed was white Republicans who control various aspects of the House and the Congress, and they deliberately shut him down. I was thinking today about Kavanaugh and how he was appointed, and yet I lost this man's name. The Attorney General today.
Don't worry about it. Just tell the story.
Yeah. Anyway, he couldn't even get an interview, right? And yet, when Kavanaugh comes up, Trump's as the president, they push him right through. So that kind of thing has been a part of American government and leadership ever since we've been here, you know. But the dominant culture doesn't want black and brown people to have the same kind of power and access, and so they cut us off at the knees every chance they get.
So Adam Clayton Powell, he was, as you said, he was white enough that he could pass. He was 6'4". He was articulate. He was a lawyer. He had an incredible vocabulary, which was intimidating in and of itself. There was actually a white congressman who said the election of Adam Clayton Powell was a disgrace. And every time Adam Clayton Powell went into Congress, he would sit by this man and he would get up and move. The press reported once that he sat by him 5 different times.
Yeah.
And he would still get up and move. To say that,
Go ahead.
To say that because a black man was elected to Congress, that it was a disgrace. When he really kind of looked like him.
Yeah. You're talking about John Rankin.
From Mississippi.
Yeah. And that goes to show you how feeble-minded racist people can be, you know. And there's this term in social psychology called cognitive dissonance. And it's the idea that a person can get so bound in one way of thinking that even when you bring them new ideas and new information, they're unable to shift. And that happens quite frequently in the mind of people who are white supremacists, that even though you may show that you are articulate, you have the education, you've jumped all the hoops, in their brain, they are so settled that you're not what they are, that no matter what you do, they don't want to be near you. It's called cognitive dissonance. It was actually introduced by a guy named Frantz Fanon.
Let's hear from Adam Clayton Powell again.
Okay.
Whenever a person keeps prodding, whenever a person keeps them squirming, whenever a person is an irritant, it serves a purpose. It may not in contemporary history look so good, but as the times roll on, future historians will say they served a purpose.
So, Dr. Stevenson.
Yeah, irritants are necessary.
Did Adam Clayton Powell serve a purpose? He said that as they saw him as an irritant.
Right.
What purpose did Adam Clayton Powell serve?
So an oyster produces a pearl, and it produces a pearl because sand gets caught in the membrane of the shell, and as that sand is rubbed against that membrane, it becomes a pearl, something of value. One of the ways that people were able to begin to run for, get elected to, and challenge the government is because they saw Adam Clayton Powell as this sand under the oyster of our government that was being rubbed against and agitating people until he came forth as a pearl. But on the flip side of that, because he's very controversial, he knocked heads with black people too. Him and Dr. King, for instance. Dr. King in 1960 had planned to do a demonstration at the Democratic National Convention, and fearing that he might get embarrassed, Powell threatened to accuse King of having a homosexual relationship with Bayard Rustin. Now, Bayard Rustin is important because Rustin is the one who wrote all the curriculums for the nonviolent activist movement that Martin Luther King used. And the reason he didn't get the notoriety is because he was gay. No problem. But if it hadn't been for his understanding of nonviolence, we wouldn't have even had a Dr. Martin Luther King.
So speaking of that, because there was a little tension. If you watch any documentaries on Adam Clayton Powell, there was that tension between the two. Do you think that the acceptance and the rise of Dr. King was intended to rub Adam Clayton Powell the wrong way? Because King in the South really was following the pattern that Clayton Powell had already set forth, and he was following that pattern, but
Yeah.
they couldn't control him.
Yeah.
When Dr. King was assassinated, I saw an interview with Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Jesse Jackson said, "White folks don't know, but y'all just lost your best friend."
Yeah, I've heard that one. You know what's interesting? I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and so it was as if that they wanted to pit the two of them against each other, because if they had come together as a force, but he saw, little Negro from the South, he's from New York, got to be smarter.
But that's the American way. Listen, the media and white America pitted Du Bois against Booker T. Washington, Martin against Malcolm. I mean, what would happen if a Northerner like Powell and a Southerner like King were able to bring their constituencies into one communion?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The greatest fear in America right now is not the Black Lives Matter movement. It's the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement has expanded across cultural, racial, and gender lines. It's the same kind of model that the Black Panthers used. The reason that Black Panthers were dangerous is not because they carried guns. It was because they were able to unite poor Blacks, poor whites from for the young patriots, and the Hispanics, the young lords. And now you have this voting bloc across racial lines that cannot be controlled by white dominance.
And so to pit Dr. King and Adam Clayton Powell against each other was orchestrated, because Adam Clayton Powell was so loved by the people of Harlem in his district that it didn't matter what he did. He was loved all over the country because of the positions that he took.
Right.
I don't think there's ever been anybody in history that Congress voted to not seat after he was elected. He was voted in, but because of the things that they had accused him of, they were able to get some legislation passed that did not allow the democracy to work.
Yeah, I can't speak to that because I've not done that level of research.
Yeah, but they did. So he was not seated in his last term because they voted not to seat him. And to think about that was the time that Adam Clayton went into kind of exile and drank himself to death, pretty much. He died the next year after he wasn't seated. The likes of Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton was a young man following Adam Clayton Powell, but never rose to that kind of power or prominence.
Yeah. I think that there is a charisma that Powell had that was more like Malcolm than Sharpton. Sharpton was an adjutant, is an adjutant, but I don't think he has the same kind of charisma as a Malcolm X. I love Malcolm. I think that of all of our leaders, and don't get me wrong, I'm not diminishing my frat brother, Dr. King, but there was something about Malcolm, man, that crossed so many different lines. I think that when we as Black people look at leaders, we have to be very clear that if nothing else, that leader has to be able to communicate with the proletariat as well as the elite. And Malcolm did that. Adam did that. I think King did it to an extent, but he was more of an upper crust. That's why Jesse Jackson was able to say white folks lost their best friend. They didn't feel that way about Malcolm because Malcolm was able to cross so many different lines. He could go into Harlem and then he could go into the university, so.
And yeah, as Adam, he was, as I said, he had all these credentials. He was considered a prince of Harlem.
Yeah.
But it's said that he did not want people to call him Reverend Powell. He just could walk down the streets of Harlem and people would refer to him as, "Hey, Adam."
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, to be able to cross those kind of lines, Beverly in Memphis said, "Awesome history lesson." Now, Dr. Stevenson,
Yes, ma'am.
how do we make sure that these kinds of lessons, people like Adam Clayton Powell, are not forgotten? Because so far, he pretty much has been.
Yeah. We, you and I, or we as a people?
As a people, just as a country.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we just have to be aware of it. I mean, I teach African American studies and I teach a number of different courses. I am surprised at how undereducated our students are about Black history by the time they get to college. And it's primarily because the curriculums are not designed to introduce contributions of anyone who is not of European descent. That's a fact. And that's why even in Alachua County, they now have an African American studies curriculum that is mandatory, right? So that these young kids can have a more integrated understanding of American history.
Well, do you think people would be surprised to find that there was somebody like Adam Clayton Powell in 1940s
Yes.
and 50s in the halls of Congress that the president called on, that was chair of a very powerful committee?
Yes, they would absolutely be surprised because the majority of the history that we read about Black people and brown people and indigenous people has been written from a negative or inferiority paradigm. So absolutely, they'll be surprised. They are actually shocked, when matter of fact, you heard of Wyatt T. Walker?
Well, I've heard of Wyatt T. Walker.
Okay, Wyatt T. Walker, if you look at the speech that Martin Luther King gives on the steps of Jefferson Memorial, Wyatt standing right behind him. You know what church he pastored?
What?
Abyssinian.
Is that right?
That's right. He passed. And so Abyssinian was not only a church for Black people, but it was a church that built politicians. Right? It always called pastors who understood the importance of relating the gospel to the situation of Black people in the ghetto.
So, with Adam Clayton Powell being a forerunner in that, and then we have the election of the pastor in Georgia, why do you think that pastors started to move away from being involved with the political process? As Fannie Lou Hamer said, these Black preachers say they don't want politics in the church. Well, they telling a lie because they want that money, and every dollar bill got a dead politician on it.
I think it depends on the denomination. To blanket all preachers like that would be, I think, a misnomer. For instance, the African Methodist Episcopal Church tends to be more socially active than the Pentecostal churches. And so I think some of it has to do with denominational affiliation. For others, I pastored a church when I was in California. I was talking to my class about this in my African American religion class. And, I felt that God was telling me to change the narrative of this church and to make it more Afrocentric. And so I wanted to name the church First United African Christian Church. Map of Africa with the cross on it and red, black, and green. Man, they tried to put me out. They said I was too Black. And so, I'm like, how can you be too Black? And what is it about this notion of Christianity that has to be white or whitewashed, especially when the majority of the Old Testament happens in Africa or near there?
Well, we've done that show. We already know
But you
the
get my
answer to that.
point. You know,
Okay.
I think that for some people they don't want to engage in this conversation because there is this commitment to a white Jesus, right? And I'm just convinced that there are those who are willing to push the envelope. But for the most part, it's just easier not to get into those controversial streams.
And telling the truth should not be considered pushing the envelope. Darius
Right.
Marshall, thank you, cousin, for this update and this history. Dr. Royal Colbert, thank you so much for watching. He said, too radical. To stuff, yeah, they shy away because it's too
Yeah,
radical. And it shouldn't, truth should not be considered radical
it should not.
because we have to give an account for which side of information we fall on, whether
Right.
it's the truth or it is one of those that God hates and abhors, and that's lying
The truth will set you free.
every time.
Uh,
Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Jr., an iconic figure in American history, an iconic figure in American politics, an iconic figure in the civil rights movement. Dr. Rick Stevenson, I really appreciate you bringing to light the information that you have shared with us tonight about Adam Clayton Powell, a man that, paved the way,
hmm.
but has not been given credit.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing?
Please.
Real quick. Martin Luther King's father was a preacher.
Mhm.
Adam Clayton Powell's father was a preacher. Malcolm X's father was a preacher and leader. And I wonder what it is about some of these men that God calls forth that follow in the footsteps of their fathers.
And take it to another level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, I've I've always admired my dad, but I never wanted to walk in his footsteps. But I was very clear that the man I was and the man I was becoming was because of who he was. But what was it like for them to see their father on Sunday or whenever, and then know that eventually they would do the same thing? That's always fascinated me, especially when it comes to black male leaders.
And I think it's the spirituality that also covers them, giving them what they need to take it to the next level and have no fear, as Adam Clayton Powell talked about. His presence in the pulpit, like 14,000 members, a mega church before churches were mega. He had
Yeah,
one in New
yeah,
York
yeah.
and commanded respect in the halls of Congress because of the power that he had in
Yeah.
Harlem. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, congressman from 1945 to 1972. Please Google him, take a look at him, and be inspired. I thank you, sir, for joining us. Royal Dr. Colbert says here, my great grandfather was Pastor Johnson Chapel here in Gainesville for 25 years. I knew eventually that I would become a
Wow.
preacher because of him. How about that?
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah.
We thank you for joining us. We will be back here next week with more insightful information to share with you, hopefully to inspire you to reach for higher heights and deeper depths and be what you were called to be.
Amen.
I'm Pamela Marshall for the Timbuktu Report. For our entire team at the Timbuktu Report, we thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is what?
Healing at the well.
At the well. Make it a great moment. We'll see you next time.